in welcoming Professor Yu Su, keynote speaker at Phonetics 2025 Hong Kong, a leading figure in speech sciences. Professor Su is renowned for his groundbreaking research on how human produces and perceives speech, especially the interplay of prosody, tone, and intonation across languages. Currently based at University College London, his work bridges theoretical linguistics and real-world applications. From speech technology to cognitive psychology, his keynote, How Does Human Language Become Digital? Professor Su explores how phonetics, not syntax, digitizes language through articulatory encoding and perceptual decoding.
So thank you for all the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my research. I waste no time by starting sharing my screen. So as you may notice that there is a slight change in my title by adding evidence from computational simulations, because all the things that I will present today is from computational simulations. So I'll start with a video. There's recent discovery that chimpanzees have sophisticated gestural communication systems. And this is one example of how it looks like. And the two chimps are trying to communicate with each other by one of them asking the other to give him a scratch.
Rose with raffia and Ramula. Rose is in a different tree. Scratching. Arm raising and shaking.
As you can see, it took 38 seconds for the chimp to get the simple message across. Give me a scratch. In 38 seconds, modern Homo sapiens, that is us, can easily say 120 words. For example, reading out your 120 word abstract for this conference. So what makes human language so efficient? According to Chomsky, language is, at its core, a system that is both digital and infinite, which gives it the property of discrete infinity. Indeed, this is a consensus now. Language is efficient because it is digital and infinite. But the further question is, how does language become digital? According to Chomsky in the same paper, each language provides an unbounded array of hierarchically structured expressions that receive interpretation at two interfaces: sensorimotor for externalization and conceptual intentional for mental processes. So in other words, discretization occurs in the brain, according to Chomsky, to allow words to become combined into infinite number of hierarchically structured expressions. And it is after that that is also externalized into sensorimotor domain, that is phonetics and phonology. And of course, it also has the interface with mental processing, which we are not concerned today. What I would like to propose is two tests to see whether this idea is valid. And the first one is that which linguistic level has the smallest number of units? And it doesn't take a lot of thinking for us to realize that phrases are almost infinite in numbers. Words, according to Oxford Dictionary, there are 600,000 English words. And in terms of syllables, for English, according to one study, there are 15,831 different syllables. Mandarin has much less, but still 1,300 syllables with tone. It is when it gets to the level of the segments that you reach a much smaller number. So for English, there are 44 consonants and vowels. For Mandarin, there are 40 to 58 consonants and vowels plus 4 tones. So this is kind of like the digitization of computers cannot start from languages like C, Python, etc. But there's also another test, that is, which linguistic level is not itself made of discrete units. Again, phrases consist of words which are already discrete, and words consisting of syllables which are also discrete. And syllables consist of segments which are also discrete. It is at the level of the segments that things become murky, because you can argue that it starts from continuous articulation and acoustics, which are not discrete, or may consist of features or gestures, which according to many theories are already discrete. But at least the digitization of speech is unlikely to start from the level of syntax. So my argument is that the digitization occurs at the level of phonetics, where analog to digital conversion takes place. And for that to happen, you need to have two discretization processes. You have to discretize the acoustic space, which itself is infinite and rich, and also the articulation space, which is also infinite and rich. So how can we do that? For that purpose, we look back at lessons from digital computers. Here's what Alan Turing proposed before the actual development of digital computers. In fact, it's his theorization that led to the development of digital computers. According to Turing, digital computers as discrete state machines make changes from one quite definite state to another. However, strictly speaking, there are no such machines. Everything really moves continuously in the physical world. But there are many kinds of machines which can profitably be thought of as being discrete state machines. Here's the key. There must be intermediate positions, but for most purposes, we can forget about them. But to ignore the intermediate states for speech, which is an evolved rather than designed communication system, unlike the computer, two problems have to be solved. One is, how can continuous articulation be converted to discrete categories? And the second, how can continuous acoustic signals be converted back to discrete categories? I'll start with a simple case, that is the Morse code, which is no longer in use, but it's a very illustrative case. The Morse code uses dots and dashes and spaces to encode discrete information. So this sequence can give you to encode AU. In speech, we already know that we have more dimensions. For example, you can use pitch for tones, and you can use spectrum for consonants and vowels. So starting with tone, we can see that you can have low tone followed by high tone, and these are two discrete units, right? But in production, what you can generate from these discrete units are things like this. So somehow it goes back to continuous process. And this is because we cannot avoid that. So here's an example of the high tone produced by a number of speakers following different tones in the preceding syllable. What you can see is that although this is a single categorical unit, but its surface form can vary very differently depending on the ending of the previous tone. And this is because to cover the distance of 6 semitones, according to one of our studies, it will take 142 milliseconds to complete the journey. So there's no way we can avoid this for humans. But this leads to the difficulty for perception, because perception has to deal with this kind of variability. Here are examples of the four Mandarin tones produced by two male speakers, but in different tonal context, as well as some of them are produced in the first syllable of a disyllabic unit, and some of them are produced in the second syllable of the disyllabic unit. So in other words, I'm only showing some very limited contextual differences and speaker differences, but still you can already see how difficult things might be for perception. And indeed, variability is an unsolved problem for speech perception, according to some of the latest reviews. But the question I'm raising now is something that people rarely think about. That is, why do listeners need to uncover categorical properties below the level of the phonemic categories? For example, do they really need to discover features or gestures? Why can't perception directly process continuous acoustic signals, for example, F0 contours? And this is what we did to test this possibility. And we did a simulation study in Chen and others, 2022. And we used support vector machine and self-organizing map, two different models to simulate tone perception in Mandarin. And they are trained in our study to either directly process F0 contours or extract various tonal features. And here are some of the features, and including, for example, discrete pitch levels. It can be 2-level or 5 levels, and some features which are more gradient. But we also tested another gestural feature, that is pitch targets. So here's what you can have for 5-level discrete tone height features. So this is something that many of us are familiar with, because the four Mandarin tones are standardly transcribed as 5-5, 2-3-5, 2-1, and 4-3. What this means is that to process the continuous F0 contours, you need to extract these discrete forms from the raw signal, and then use these to recognize the tones. And to extract the gestural, we try to extract the underlying pitch targets, which is already one step in advance compared to the suggestion by motor theory, because motor theory says that the gestures themselves are discrete. But the underlying target is less variable, because they represent the underlying forms according to our target approximation model. So in this model, the articulation of a tone starts from underlying forms that are relatively discrete, but in production, you have to start from an initial state, and then you have to approach the underlying target over time. And when you're done with one tone, you approach the other one. And because of, again, physical limit, you cannot make the sharp turn. You have to do this. And this ends up having a continuous F0 surface form. But we managed to extract these underlying targets using the target optimizer. But here are the results of the simulation. The first thing we discovered with some surprise is that all the models, because they are made trainable during the simulation itself, they all achieved high accuracy. All of them are above 90% accuracy of tone recognition. What this tells us is that variability itself is not a barrier when it is used as data. And second discovery is that training with full F0 contours led to the best recognition, which suggests that no part of the transition should be ignored, which is unlike what Alan Turing imagined, because we make use of all the transitional details to achieve the recognition of the categories. And third one is that extracted arbitrary targets showed no advantage. They're good, but they can be only just as good as processing F0 contours directly. So that shows that because it's a complicated process itself, it's not necessary. So what this tells us is that perception does not need to know things about articulation, unlike a lot of theories have assumed. In fact, overall, there's no need to uncover any underlying forms, not even the semi-discrete articulatory targets, because the task of perception is only to identify the phonological categories. In the process, you don't need to discover or recognize the other underlying forms which are supposedly categorical. Now, this simplicity of perception actually allowed us to ask an even further question. That is, how do children learn articulatory encoding in the first place? Note that this is something that is critical for an evolved system because over all the generations, each time you have to relearn the system afresh. So if perception does not require knowledge of articulation, what that suggests is that children can start from it. And that is indeed the case from real life data. So in real life, by now we know very clearly that children start to learn perception, language-specific phonological perception by 6 months. And they don't start to speak their first words until 12 months old. What is also interesting is that, according to Cool, 2003, similar cases can be found in songbirds, which are also vocal learners. So meaning that they have to learn their songs during their young age. And their learning consists of 2 stages. In the early stage, they only need to listen to the songs. After that, they don't even need to listen to the songs, but they'll do vocal practices during which they learn to sing the songs themselves. So what this suggests is that the learned perception could guide articulation learning. And this is what we tested in another study. We did a project called Evoc Learn, during which we trained an articulatory synthesizer, the state-of-the-art articulatory synthesizer called Vocal Track Lab, to simulate a learner, vocal learner. And the model also implemented the synchronization model of the syllable, which I'll explain in a moment. And in the process, we tested different learning schemes. So this is what synchronization model of the syllable says. That is, for every syllable, the consonant, vowel, and tone are synchronized at their onset, in the sense that they all start their own target approximation toward their own relative targets at the same time. And at the turn of the syllable, they suddenly change to approach another set of targets. And in this model, the so-called co-articulation that we're so familiar with happens only within the syllable. There's no co-articulation between syllables. And we have now received empirical support for multiple studies that we have conducted in the last few years. And the modeling process also involved a recognizer. In this time, we just used state-of-the-art deep learning-based recognizer. So there's nothing surprising here, but it is something that is already widely used in speech technology. So here are the results of training the vocal tract lab. But the results that I'm presenting here are only from the perception guided learning, because that gave us the best results. So here's the video.
Bad.
This is the recognizer, and it trains the model.
Bad.
And this is
Bad.
synthetic one based on perception guided learning. And to learn that,
Bad.
you need to optimize all the architecture
Bad.
parameters.
Beat. Beat. Bed. Bed. Bit. Bit. That. That. Did. 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 Good. Good. Body. Body. Debbie. Debbie.
But. But. Why? Why? Bet. Bet. That. That. Cut. Cut. Body. Body. Daddy. Daddy.
Okay, so these are perception guided learning, but we also have results from acoustic guided learning. As you can see from these figures, the perception guided learning gained much better results than acoustic guided learning. But what is the most interesting from these figures is this one. That is when you plot the acoustic errors over the accuracy of listener perception, because these results are from the listener dictation. They have to write whatever words they have heard. There's no correlation between the acoustic error and the accuracy of perception. But for the recognition error generated by the learning process itself, you can see a negative correlation over accuracy of perception, which means that the less the recognition error, the better the human perception. So what do these results tell us? First, as children start to develop phonological perception, they can use it to guide their vocal learning, provided that they have also started to babble canonically, which happens at about 7 months. That is saying ba, 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 ma, 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 which indicates that they have mastered the basic principle of the syllable, a mechanism to synchronize the articulation of consonants, vowels, and tone. And then the study shows that guidance by perception is more effective than direct imitation. We have also replicated these results from another dimension, that is the recognition-guided vocal learning of tone and focus. So in Meng and others, we show that production of tone can be learned under guidance of tone recognition just as well as by F0 fitting in pentatrainer. And in Ding and others, production of tone and focus can be simultaneously learned under guidance of tone focus recognition, just as well as by F0 fitting in pentatrainer. So this leads us to the general conclusion. How does language become digital? Digitization starts from articulatory target approximation, which converts discrete categories into discrete underlying shapes. But during articulation, it goes back to continuous signal as well. It is perception that completes the digitization process by identifying discrete categories from syllable-sized raw acoustic signals. And both processes are enabled by learning, which treats variability as data rather than barrier. Because vocal learning is trained by perception, they only need to agree on categorical identities. There is no need for strict matching of phonetic forms between production and perception, which is something that people have been trying to find out all the time. But in fact, there is no need for that. So going back to the beginning topic, we can see that words are composed of phonological units that are phonetically discretized. And language is digitized at the phonetic level, not at the syntactic level, according to Chomsky. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Xu. So we now have 2-3 minutes for questions. If you would like to ask something, please raise your hands or use the chat.
Hello, may I ask something? I raised my hand. I don't know if the system functions. Okay, thank you very much, Issue. It's always a pleasure to have you. Well, I must say for everybody, Issue is a good friend of our society. And he was in our very, very first workshop at the time in Glyphada in Athens, 97. So, if I take the big picture, we can say that this combination, continuous and discrete, that's the magic of language in order to communicate fast and effectively.
Exactly.
Otherwise, we couldn't make it. I mean, this co-articulation, it is what it speeds up the process. Think, we couldn't communicate with discrete units.
Right.
Co-articulation and variability helps us. Which means if we go back, because we shouldn't throw everything away, all the old things. I mean, the phoneme allophones and all things, they were just forgotten, but they exist still today. We communicate, we say segments, phonemes, allophones. Okay, and in this sense, I would name the distinction, the old distinction, langue, parole, language and speech. Speech is continuous, language is discrete in order to communicate.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah, kind of like that. But what we have done is to specify how exactly it is done. That is not a trivial question. Yeah.
You've done an excellent work, Issue.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed.
So, okay, we have time for one more question, 2 more questions. Okay, Marcena Sundar was first. Sundar Hima.
Hello, my name is Sundar Humay and I'm from Pakistan. Mr. Liu, I have a question that you have identified and mentioned discrete units. My question is, if I'm audible, that don't we follow in phonetics and phonology the syntactic structures at the discrete unit level of phonemes? So why can't we relate it to the discrete unit of syntax in phonetics and phonology?
Sorry, could you repeat the last sentence again?
My question was that in phonetics and phonology, when we talk about the sounds, we are actually referring to the discrete units of sounds. And in a syntax level, we are referring to the discrete unit of grammar. Why can't we say that in phonetics and phonology, we are referring to the discrete units of syntax of sounds.
Okay, so I'll try to answer the question from what I can understand. And basically, Chomsky's idea, if you read a lot of his writings, is the notion that somehow over evolution, something happened in the brain that makes everything discrete. What I have discussed is that the fact that speech becomes discretized or digitized is that we have phonetics. Phonetics turns articulation into the basic digital units. And with the basic digital units, then you can compose larger units. So syntax is not the starting point. It's already the level of the equivalent of a C language, Python language is already high up there. But before that, a lot of digitization has to happen to form the foundation. And the things we do in phonetics is the foundation.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Marcena, you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question, but first of all, I would like to thank you for your wonderful talk. This was very interesting. I have a question concerning one of, as I strongly assume, one of your claims, namely you said that there are no co-articulatory effects across syllables, but rather if we have co-articulatory effects, they would happen within a syllable, right?
Yes.
So I wonder how universal this claim could be, because when I think about languages with very complex clusters, consonantal clusters like Georgian, Polish, and others, then it is very difficult to determine the boundary, right? So we don't know exactly where the syllable boundary is. It's very difficult to determine the beginning and the end of the syllable. Even if you ask, native speakers, if you run experiments, that's a big question sometimes. It's not always the case, but sometimes. So my question is how universal your claim is about this particular topic. I understand that if you take tone languages, it's much easier because this is the domain of the assignment. But what if you take other languages? That's my question.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. In fact, what you have pointed out is the key to the issue. So first, our claim is that this principle is absolutely universal. It's universal across all human languages. Second, the question you raised about the boundary, that's exactly the essence of the studies I listed. Because one of the first things to determine is where the syllable starts. So in general, to make a long story short, what we have determined is that the syllables, as we decided, determined through very careful studies, is at least 100 milliseconds earlier than our current understanding of a syllable onset. That is the onset of, for example, consonant closure or start of the frication of fricatives. And that's already too late. So the real syllable onset all starts at least 100 milliseconds before that, and probably 150 milliseconds before that too. Of course, this whole thing would require another whole presentation, but that's the short answer I can give you.
Yeah, okay. I'm getting the point, but then I'm thinking that, of course, this is the core of your claim. But then I'm thinking about, how this would align with phonology, with our understanding of the syllable. If it doesn't align with with the boundaries, or even more important, because your claim also refers to children and how they acquire the language. So if you ask children to clap their hands at the boundaries, right, they would use this, but it wouldn't align with your approach. This is where I don't know how to combine these two, right?
Okay.
So it is a kind of abstract syllable you are assuming, or is this the phonological
No. Our
concept
claim is that syllable is not abstract at all. It's very concrete, very concrete. Okay, the one
yes,
thing I
then if
forgot to
it's
mention
yeah.
to refer to your question is that our studies actually started from English, not from Mandarin. Mandarin is something that we did the last, only in the latest studies. So our determination of the syllable boundary and synchronization was from English. As
Okay,
for
but English
phonology,
is not a language that is very complex. So I was talking about Georgian, Polish, and other languages where it is even for researchers difficult to determine the boundaries. There is like you can have two consonants going to the first syllable or to the second. So how would you able to determine this?
of course, as you know, all claims are theoretical, are hypothetical. So I encourage all researchers who are interested in this topic to test our proposal. I'm not claiming we're right, but we're proposing that this has to be the case, and this has to be tested. It's to be verified by studies.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank
So
you. Thank you very much.